our sessions normally with reflections shared by one of our school board members tonight, Miss Kathy. Reflections. Kathy?
Thank you. October 2020 reflections. As we are now halfway into October and during this year's pandemic, I would like to share some interesting facts and personal thoughts I have reflected on these past few months. October has always been my favorite month. Marching band competitions, football games, Oktoberfest, Ethnic Expo, and the most beautiful splash of color God blesses us with each year. We often go horseback riding and attend the Kelp's annual Farm Fest to gather pumpkins, go on hay rides, and have a bowl of bean soup that was cooked on an open fire in the big black cauldron. Making memories for sure. The Kelp's Farm Fest tradition has been in our family for us for the last 23 years. As we trekked there this year, we knew COVID would cancel the festival. However, for my 19-year-old daughter, we still go and get pumpkins and take the annual sibling photo on the old fall decorated wagon with their pumpkins. This is an annual tradition that she and her 20-year-old brother will not let go for a long time. So what is special about the month of October? It is the second autumn month. National Fire Prevention Week falls during the week of October 9th each year. There are many health observances that have October as their national month. These include healthy lungs, breast cancer, lupus, spinal bifida, blindness, sudden infant death syndrome, and Down syndrome awareness. The annual Columbus area Down syndrome support group had a virtual annual buddy walk this year. This raises money for support of families that have had a child with trisomy 21, aka Down syndrome. October for me also reminds us of our annual flu shots, getting my annual mammogram screening, and fall break. This fall break, we elected to stay home. October 19th, today marks my best friend Julie Allen Hall's birthday. The gift that will never change is our daughters being born on the same day, the 26th of January. But the most important gift I received on this day in 1999 was my son James. James was born 3 weeks early. He was due to arrive November 1st, All Saints Day, and my two nephews' birthdays. However, he decided to come the day before a large county full-scale exercise that I was coordinating. 7 pounds, 5 ounces, and 19 inches long, beautiful. Delivery was fast and furious, lasting 20 minutes. James was born October 19th. His right lung was not completely developed, and we were transferred to the NICU unit in Riley Hospital. After a week-long stay at Riley, we were coming home on oxygen. James was born with trisomy 21. You know this as Down syndrome. He did not have many markers, and prior to delivery, I was tested, and there were no indications that he would present with any abnormalities. I am blessed to live in Bartholomew County. With my work at Homeland Security, I had the opportunity to tour other schools and see what their inclusion program was. It was shocking to me. Thank you, Dr. Van Horn, for fighting the fights to keep our kids mainstreamed because of the support of James's teachers and his village. James had the best education pre-K through 12 I could ask for. He was homecoming king, ran unified track and won state their junior year, completed several 5K runs, wrestled at Central, and received third place in his weight class at the Tri-County tournament. He was safety patrol and the Mustang mascot at Southside. He earned his Aero Light in Cub Scouts and achieved his rank of Eagle Scout at age 16. He also earned double bronze palms as well. He graduated with a Core 40 diploma with his sister. As they took a bow on the stage to their classmates, of whom without would have been a struggle to achieve all he had. He works at Freddy's since 2018. He attended an adult leadership course in scouting called Wood Badge and was asked to be on staff this year. He worked at Dollar General Store and most recently attended and graduated Erskine Green Training Institute in Muncie in the heart of the hotel program. Laundry, houseman, and housekeeper. On October 9th, he became a new homeowner. He moved out last week. He can ride the buses, pay for meals, and go shopping independently. Of course, there are some challenges, but don't we all have them? Today, my son is 21. A labor and delivery was a whirlwind of events, was just a beginning. I remember being very determined to ensure he was given all the resources possible to achieve what he could achieve. Though James does not know he has trisomy 21, as we know, he would use it as an excuse. There was not a lot of information that would prepare me to give birth to a child with this different ability, but I have faith that this was part of the plan. I remember the best advice I was given at Riley Hospital when we were getting ready to leave. Ann DeMonico, a social worker, asked me if there were any other questions that I had. I said, yes, what do I do with him to help him and care for him? She stated, as every day I think of this, you take him home, you love him, you care for him like any other baby. You discipline him when needed, and you teach him. Most of all, you're his mother, his biggest fan and advocate for him. He is a little boy first, not a disability. That will grow up to be wonderful. Enjoy this journey that God has blessed you and your family with. My journey with James, I would not change it at all. Most parents would agree there is a different joy that is brought to us that other parents do not get to experience. I am blessed that James loves to share this joy with all of his friends, teachers, family, and community. There's a poem that was given to me very early after we came home from the hospital. It's called "Welcome to Holland." This is by Emily Pearl Kinsley, and it starts by saying, I am often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience and understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It is like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make wonderful plans to see the Colosseums, the Michelangelo, David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life I dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language. And you will meet a whole new group of people you never would have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy, but after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice Holland has windmills and Holland has tulips. Holland has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away. because the loss of that dream is very, very significant loss. But if you spend your time mourning the fact that you didn't get to go to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special and very lovely things about Holland. Happy birthday to James, who turns 21 today. Thank you for sharing this adventure we call life. We are so proud of you, and I would never change it, nor do I regret going to Italy. I like being different, and I feel more engaged on this journey with you and the fact that you're taking me on it. May the Lord continue his blessings on you, and you continue to share and show the world your capabilities of your different abilities. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you for sharing that very personal and intimate reflections with us. Most of us have got the opportunity to know James. As you're recounting his accomplishments, it made me tired just knowing how much he's already crammed into the first 21 years. And I know he's got a lot ahead of him. Thanks again for sharing that. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And happy birthday, James.
Birthday.
If you're able, would you join me and stand in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dr. Bills is not able to be with us this evening, but the rest of our board is here, so we have a quorum. Therefore, I call this meeting to order. Our BCSC mission, vision, and high expectation objectives are posted in the room for us as we work through our opportunities this evening. I will, I think, immediately gavel out, and we'll have a public meeting on the BCSC CEA tentative agreement. Dr. Roberts and Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I'm going to call Mr. Phillips up, and we'll run through information in regards to the tentative agreement with our collective, or with the Columbus Educators Association in preparation for our collective bargaining agreement.
All right, thank you, Dr. Roberts. We'll go through this relatively quickly. I've done this a few times in the last few days, so board members, if you have any questions, there's no actions for you to take this evening, but this is a public meeting, but we'll run through the information real quickly for both parties. So relatively involved process with collective bargaining, as always. Started back in June with informal negotiations, and then those negotiations become formal on September 15th after we get the official ADM count, or at least unofficial ADM count, and then it has to conclude before November 15th, but we're lucky this year to be wrapping up relatively early. The last action there will be proposed this Friday in a special board meeting to vote on this tentative agreement. I want to thank the members of the bargaining team, at least a few of whom are here tonight. I know Amy London and Dakota Huddleston are here
Scott as well.
for the Teachers Association.
See Scott as well.
Scott Rayburn as well. Scott snuck in back there. And then also John Green, Dr. Roberts, of course, Teresa Heine, and John Green could not be here tonight. And then Dr. Shedd and Mr. Caldwell also tag-teamed being at all of the meetings when they could. So something we decided to do differently this year is kind of add some context to the current collective bargaining agreement by looking at some of the things we've been able to accomplish in the last two contracts prior to this. The first of those being a 2-year contract passed back in 2017. And in that contract, we were able to reestablish a salary schedule that had been lost after 2011's legislative session, when the legislature prevented us from having regular steps built into a schedule. We raised the starting salary over those 2 years for teachers from $36,720 to $38,750, a 5.5% increase in 2 years. We also built into that salary schedule a permanent full step increase for teachers that already had a master's degree at the beginning of that 2017 school year. And so that has been built into each year, permanent increases. The Teachers Association passed that contract with 90% vote. and average teacher increases were 3.2 and 2.3% during those 2 contract years. Then last year's contract was probably the most challenging one that I've been a part of since 2005-6, when we had the last health trust crisis in 2005-6. On top of that, we lost 47 kids on ADM compared to the previous fall. And so it was an extra challenging year that year. In spite of that, we were able to provide 2.5% increases, average of 2.5% for teachers over that period of time, raise the starting salary again, and then we're able to stabilize health trust reserves because of the changes that we worked with the Teachers Association to implement, as painful as those might have been. And then it was after this contract passed that you remember you approved a transfer of $1.4 million from the rainy day fund to permanently move up the starting date of teachers' contracts. And then maybe most importantly, at least in the last 4 years, for teacher compensation, this last June we passed a referendum campaign, thanks to the community, thanks to the voters of this community for their support of our teachers and our school corporation. So some of the challenges that coming into bargaining this year that you're aware of, the ADM count was up. I'll go over this in detail here in a little bit, but still down from 2018 and even 2017 prior to that. Questions about how the state is going to handle virtual attendance in the future after January 1st. The continued trend of losing ADM from fall to spring. And then, in my opinion, maybe the most important factor is what's coming out of the legislature this spring as they really tackle a difficult time with lower tax collections. And then, of course, we mentioned, I think at the last board meeting, Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned the need to restore staffing levels to where we were prior to this year. So one of the other things we noted as we entered into negotiations this year is all of the things that are going to be occurring around teacher compensation during the course of this school year, starting with that extra half day of pay that teachers came in early and got the year, worked hard to get the year started well in spite of all the challenges from COVID-19. Teacher appreciation grants should come in December again this year, we expect. The salary increases, if all goes well and you approve this contract on Friday, the salary increases and retroactive pay for teachers should occur on the November 20th paycheck. And then referendum increases and associated stipends would go into effect on January 1st. And then you all approved setting aside $250,000 for stipends for teachers teaching on multiple platforms, and we would anticipate paying those out in February. A lot of things happening in the course of this school year when it comes to teacher compensation. So the overview of the agreement is that returning teachers take a step on the salary scale. The steps remain $1,200 between each step, except for the last one, which I'll show you here in a minute. That averages a 2% increase for all teachers. In addition to that, a 2% increase on the Appendix B and C, which is the extracurricular and co-curricular schedule that we have for teachers doing additional duties. You also approved 2 meetings ago, I believe, changing the definition of covering another teacher's class from period to hour. And then we also have this every 5 to 7 years, a 27 calendar pay issue, and we'll get into the details on that. We came up with what we think is a productive way of addressing that problem. And then, were it not for the support of our community and that operating referendum that passed this spring, we certainly would not be celebrating a 2% increase this year, would we? So were it not for the support of our community, this would not be as much of a celebration as we feel it is around supporting our teachers. The teacher referendum increases will be $5,000, $10,000, and $15,000, which is what we had proposed during the campaign, the referendum campaign, and those are based on years of experience. The maximum salary is $85,000 between the base and the referendum increase. And then we also included stipends for all teachers who don't qualify for an experience increase from the referendum. Here's the old teacher salary schedule, which will look very much like the new one on the right, with the exception of the last step that we just added $1,200 to the last step at the end. But other than that, the salary schedules are identical. As it seems like we always do, we spend a tremendous amount of time during bargaining talking about the teachers that are above the scale. We have, as the contracts have changed with legislative requirements, going back to the beginning of this decade, we've had teachers that have been all over the place on the scale. And so we have a group of teachers we have to usually address individually during the course of bargaining. And so there are two groups of those: teachers between the current top of the scale and the new top of the scale, and they are all over the place in between there. They will move to the top of the scale and receive a stipend for the difference between their increase on the base and $600, so no one gets less than $600 at the top. And there are a couple of examples in there. And any teacher above the current top of the scale receives a $600 stipend. It's important to note that every one of these teachers, between their base increase and their referendum increase, will be earning $85,000 during the course of the next school year, starting this January, because that's the maximum salary, and they're all within range to get to that maximum salary. But the stipend is meant to make up for the fact that they miss out on some retro pay for this first 6 months of this contract year, and so they will still earn the same as teachers not at that level. Here's some detail on the referendum increases. What we decided to do after many meetings this spring was grant 1 point for each year of experience of BCSC experience for teachers, and then 1/3 of a point for each year of experience outside of BCSC. The point being here that we want to reward teachers that come to us from outside of the district, but our kids and our community didn't benefit from the years that they were teaching somewhere else. But now our kids will, now that they're in our schools teaching for our kids. And so those points then determine what their increase will be. Any teacher with between 5 and 9.9 points at the beginning of the year will receive a $5,000 annual increase, and then it's $10,000 and $15,000 for the next level of each of those points. Again, the base and the referendum cannot exceed that $85,000 maximum. It is important to note that we cannot spend any referendum dollars until January 1st. And so these stipends are for an entire school year. Because they're only being paid out for half of the school year, each of these teachers, this will be a $2,500 increase for the first group, $5,000 for the second group, and $7,500 for the third group, starting January 1st and paying out through August 13th. So those 17 pays. And then starting on that first pay in the next contract year, it's the whole $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000. Teachers not earning a referendum increase will be paid a stipend in January. We estimate that amount based on the amount of dollars set aside for those stipends. It's a fixed amount of dollars, $130,000 to be paid in stipends to those teachers that don't qualify. But until we know exactly how many teachers qualify based on years of experience, we can't quite determine what that amount will be. But it will be somewhere between $400 and $500 for every teacher who doesn't qualify for an experience bump because of the referendum. Every few years, probably every 6 years on average, there will be 27 paychecks in a calendar year. And all public entities, from a budget perspective, counties, cities, schools, we all run into this. And from a cash flow issue, it creates a couple of $1 million issue for us if we pay 27 pays out in one calendar year. And so everyone addresses this problem a little differently. The most common way is the way that we had done it in the past, which is to delay the first paycheck of the contract year in August by 1 week. And so every certified teacher and administrator went 3 weeks between pay. And that reset the button until 6 years later when you had to do this again. Working with the CEA, they surveyed their members and said, how would you like to address this problem this time? And we decided to take the first 9 paychecks of next contract year. Those are between, I believe, August 26th or so and December 31st. There would be 10 checks in that period. We're just taking the 9 pays and spreading them across the 10 checks, keeping the schedule in place so it's still every 2 weeks. Just each of those checks is about 11% less for each check. The collective amount of money being the exact same amount of money that they would earn if we skipped a week and went 3 weeks between pays. So there's no difference in their income for the calendar year. This just saves them from having to skip an entire week of getting paid. And that was our collective solution. The best part of this from the guy who helps direct the payroll department in our school corporation is that if we implement this solution, we don't have to deal with this problem again until 2032. So that's the best part of that from my perspective. The teachers are in the middle of their vote right now. They voted today and they'll vote again, continue that voting tomorrow. And pending the results of that vote, we'll have a special board meeting on Friday night, Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock in this room, I believe, and ask for your approval of this tentative agreement. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Chad. Dr. Roberts, anything you would add?
I appreciate Chad's explanation of the process that we went through and the result that we have, and appreciate certainly the efforts of our Columbus Educators Association as we came to this agreement. So I'm hoping that it is something you'll see fit to approve as we finish up the process.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Phillips? Or
Could I just ask a clarifying question? I should know this, but I forgot. So, okay, so whether their points, a teacher's points for referendum pay is for the 2021 school year. Is it counting that, or it's counting 1920? Am I making any sense? So how many, so do they have 5 years because they completed 1920? Or are we counting 2021 as one of the years?
We will, for each year, we will count the points that they have at the beginning of the school year.
Okay.
So the points they had in August of this year is what will determine what their increase is on January 1st. Next August, it will determine their increase for that entire school year, 21-22 school year.
Okay.
So it's determined at the beginning of the school year each year.
Okay, so there could be teachers who are getting a referendum increase in August of 21.
Correct. There are a
Okay.
large number, as a matter of fact, that
Okay.
are some that will not qualify in January for an increase,
Right.
but then do immediately in August when we start school.
Right, awesome. All right, thank you.
any other questions? Mr.
Yeah,
Stenner?
Just, thank you. Appreciate the presentation, all the work that went into it. Curious about how the 27 pay problem happens in an IRS year, a calendar year,
Correct, in a calendar year.
and the solution that we came up with is not included in the contract that we'll vote on Friday?
It is. The contract that you'll vote on Friday sets our expectation for any time we would have 27 pays in a calendar year. And so it will apply next year. It's not just for now. It says basically any calendar year in which 27 pay periods would fall, this is the way the school corporation will handle it.
So then it's just assumed that that language would continue on in future contracts.
Correct.
Thank you. The other question, how many folks, how many belly buttons are a part of this contract, or compensation is part of the contract?
720.
Thank you.
Chad, I think you clarified that the referendum funding for at least teacher compensation, certified staff compensation, is a calendar year 21 through calendar year 28 set of funding, is what's the community voted on.
That's correct.
Right, so, well, however those contracts roll out in the future, that'll be the end of it until there's another referendum approved or whatever the community decides.
Right.
Dr. Roberts, I would encourage you not to lose a lot of sleep worrying about 2032 and give that a few
Start
years
worrying about
before you worry.
2028 or 29 first,
There you go.
yes.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. All right, if there's no other questions, thank you, Mr. Phillips, for your presentation. I'll gavel back in. This board meeting is back in session. We start this evening with a presentation about social emotional learning. I think Dr. Hack and Mrs. Frazier are going to join us and update us on SEL.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Frazier, and I am the Social and Emotional Learning Curriculum Coordinator for BCSC. I want to thank Mr. Caldwell and Dr. Roberts and the board members for allowing me to speak this evening. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Hack and Mr. Jensen for making SEL a priority in our school buildings. Today, we're going to be talking about social and emotional learning in our district and the SEL supports for not only students, but also for teachers and staff. I want to start with a little quote that says, "Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all." This quote is from edutopia.org, but it's true. We educate students not only academically, but we also need to be looking at the whole child and educating them emotionally, physically, and mentally, and making sure that they are well and prepared to learn in the classroom. So what is social and emotional learning? According to CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, engage or manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. There are two graphics on the screen. The first graphic comes from CASEL, and it shows their 5 core SEL competencies. CASEL is the gold standard, if you will, of social and emotional learning. And the state of Indiana has done a great job at modeling after this graphic. So they have created their own SEL competencies using the same 5 that CASEL has, but also adding in 2 additional competencies, which are mindset and sensory motor integration. And this happened with the collaboration of their social and emotional behavior wellness team at the state level. What are the benefits of SEL? Well, research confirms that social and emotional competencies can be taught, they can be modeled, practiced, and lead to positive student outcomes that are important for success in school and in life. There are 4 benefits here on the screen, but I'd like to highlight 2, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. SEL can improve students' social and emotional skills, attitudes, relationships, academic performance, and perceptions of classroom and school climate, and also create a decline in students' anxiety, behavior, and substance use. I'd like to thank Dr. Roberts, Dr. Hack, and Kelly Thompson for allowing me to be a part of our district's reopening plan. This here is a snippet of the social and emotional part of that reopening plan. Because this was put into place, schools in BCSC are prioritizing safety, connection, and relationships in all of our buildings. The developmental relationships. Search Institute has done years of research and has found that these relationships are powerful in young people's lives. These relationships build on Search Institute's work with the developmental assets as well. These relationships are providing student support, expanding their possibilities, challenging students' growth, sharing power, and expressing care for students. Through community partnerships, working with Heather Carson, the director of the Council for Youth Development, and receiving Elwood dollars and Heritage Fund dollars, we have been able to think differently about SEL in all of our buildings. Thank you to these partners, as well as Counseling Counts for promoting this work and supporting this work in the district. Supporting students' SEL needs with that safety, connection, and relationships focus. First thing I'd like to highlight is igniting sparks. Sparks are the interests and passions that young people have within them that light a fire in their lives and expresses the essence of who they are and what they offer to the world. And I would like for you to think about what your spark is as an adult. It's just as important for adults to have a spark as well as children. Search Institute has repeatedly found that students with sparks and the support for developing them have better results both developmentally and academically. The Council for Youth Development had their youth summit this year, and the theme was Igniting Sparks. They put together a panel discussion and short documentary that students were able to participate in virtually. Also, Heather Carson and partners at Foundation for Youth and Council for Youth Development created a workbook, as well as additional activities that we promoted in the schools. And many of our teachers took advantage of that opportunity. Some teachers and counselors are doing Spark Minute meetings where they meet with young students in kindergarten through second grade, and they create a slide presentation of what their sparks are. Third through sixth graders have been creating their own Spark slides because they do know how to navigate Google Slides much easier than our younger students. Also, we've been using a software program called Wordle, and it creates students' sparks into a collage that Braylon Nolting, our lead counselor who is at Richards, has been putting outside of students' classroom doors. So as students walk through the hallway, they're able to see what sparks everyone has in each classroom. And also, we've been asking teachers to promote these sparks during their morning meetings, and some counselors have been promoting them through their College Go Week as well. Another thing I'd like to talk about are welcoming and inclusion activities. These include greeting students by name at the door, welcoming them, also having teacher and student callbacks or call-in response, promoting morning meetings and also restorative circles in classrooms, and creating that overall culture of empathy. Engaging practices is another component I'd like to highlight. We try to reteach and model PBIS expectations in our classrooms, also promoting collaborative learning experiences through Kagan structures, just trying to get students to interact with each other as much as possible, and also incorporating regulation tools and regulation stations in classrooms. Each of you was given one regulation tool, which is a stress ball that can be used just to calm the brain and have students ready to attend to tasks easier. Also, you were given a gratitude journal. This is a gratitude journal for kids. All of our third graders in the district were given these journals. They focus attention on the positives that are happening in their lives, and research suggests that feelings of gratitude may even possess some mental and physical health benefits as well. So that is yours to keep. Hopefully you have a young person in your life that would be able to use that journal, or possibly you could model some of the things that are in it for yourself. Our elementary bridge students were given a bridge bag, and inside those bridge bags was an SEL tool, a regulation tool, or a book or social emotional resource that could be used at home. Also, our teachers are promoting brain intervals and physical activity and trying to get the kids out to get some fresh air. And lastly, optimistic closures. This is just a positive way to end the day and remind the students that they are a part of a school community and that they are cared and loved for when they leave the classroom each day. And I have a few graphics here. There's a video in the middle. The Wordle collage is on your left. This is an example from a Richards classroom in 4th grade. And also the poster over here on the right is from Mount Healthy. They drew out their sparks on note cards and put them on posters and posted them around the building. The video that we're going to watch is a 4th grader at Richards, and he is talking through his spark slides.
Ellen Sparkman in 4th grade, Mrs. Renner. My spark is playing hockey. I fuel my spark by training myself and getting ready. I found my spark in 2020. what makes me special. The best about me is I help other hockey players. I am very nice. Spark support. My dad helps me with my spark. My coach teaches me how to do stuff. My mom helps me with my spark. I can help someone on my hockey team how to do stuff. Who am I in the future? I want to play in the NHL. I will have 2 or 3 pets and maybe 1 kid. I will live in Columbus, Ohio.
So bringing a little bit of student voice into the board meeting, I thought you would enjoy seeing that. Mr. Williams, is there a trick? Here we go. All right, SEL instruction for students. First thing is SEL curriculum. Thank you again to the Elwood and Heritage Fund dollars for making this possible. I teach a life skills training curriculum to all of our 4th graders in the district. Life skills training started in the secondary level and then filtered its way down to the elementary level. Foundation for Youth and Communities That Care help get that curriculum to our secondary students. I also teach Too Good for Drugs by the Mendez Foundation, and this is a curriculum that all 1st graders in our district receives. Secondary has advisory, and during advisory on alternating days, their focus is on building SEL skills, developing positive relationships, and acquiring developmental assets. Educational neuroscience is something that our teachers are focusing on, and that's just helping students create an awareness of how their brains work, focusing on the brain states, their survival brain state, emotional brain state, and executive function. And knowing what they can do to self-regulate and help calm themselves down is something that teachers are working hard at. And also promoting brain intervals. SEL competencies, teachers are working at embedding these competencies intentionally in their work in the classroom. And those competencies include mindset, sensory motor integration, connection, collaboration, insight, regulation, and critical thinking skills. And lastly, 3 signature practices. CASTLE promotes these practices, and those are welcoming inclusion activities, engaging practices, and optimistic closures. And just a few pictures I would like to share with you. In the top 3 pictures, you will see morning meetings happening in buildings. Mrs. Brenda Frady over here in the top right, she has some bridge students, but then also traditional students. And so during their morning meeting, she's carrying around her Chromebook and letting kids who are having online school see kids who are in the traditional setting. So again, fostering that community. The brain states on the bulletin board are posted at Mount Healthy Elementary School. They are working hard on conscious discipline and implementing those practices in their building, as well as practicing a breathing technique. This is called pretzel breathing. And all you have to do, you can practice it with me, is stick your arms out and cross them, thumbs down, interlace your fingers, pull it in, put your thumb on your chin, and you take 4 deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, in through your nose, out through your mouth. And you do this 2 more times, 4 to 5 times, and it just helps kids center that crossing their midline and getting them centered and relaxed to continue the work throughout their day. And then this is a bulletin board at Southside Elementary School, Be the Eye in Kind, promoting kindness in students. And then supporting our new teachers. These are the ways that I am helping to support new teachers in our district. And in BCSC, we do a beautiful job with our new teachers. We go above and beyond with these individuals by providing professional development, supporting them through New Teacher Academy, and then also meeting them one-on-one to help promote their SEL needs. And thank you to Dr. Heck for starting this work 5 years ago and continuing it today. Supporting our staff SEL needs. We are promoting staff self-care, allowing teachers to take breaks when needed, and also promoting them to have accountability partners, someone that they can talk to throughout the day and relate with. Also, we have BCSC Health and Wellness newsletters Braylon Nolting, our lead counselor, who is at Richards Elementary School. She and I collaborate on these newsletters. We send them out once a month, and I gave you a copy of one of our recent health and wellness newsletters for you to take a look at. These newsletters focus on community, mental health resources, wellness tips, self-care tips, and also how teachers can integrate these SEL competencies into their classrooms. Also, Mindful Monday tips and tricks. I put these tips in our principals' Monday notes so that they can share with their teachers and staff. They focus on self-care, mental health, and wellness tips as well. And then we provide our staff with professional development. Administrators modeling these 3 signature practices that we've talked about in their staff meetings to show teachers how they could implement that into their classroom. Also, we are having a Care for Yourself, Care for Others administrator PD with Dr. Sandy Washburn and Deanna Nybarger, our partnership with IU that is coming up next week. And Conscious Discipline book study with Dr. Sandy Washburn and Deanna Nybarger. Our principals are involved with that, as well as a small group of teachers to learn how the brain works and how we can bridge PBIS and also SEL. And Counseling Counts, Developmental Assets team, our elementary team, promoting ACEs and also developmental assets and relationship resources that we can share with our buildings. And community partnership with CYD, Council for Youth Development, also providing developmental asset, developmental relationship, and trauma-informed PD through Zoom. Heather Carson and I are putting together some webinars, kind of 101 sessions, if you will, with developmental assets and developmental relationships. So hopefully we can get those out on the BCSC website soon so others can take part in that professional development. Any questions with what I've presented to you this evening?
Mr. Stenner?
I'm curious, completely supportive of what we're doing here. What are some of the measures that we're putting in place? How will we know that this is working for us? How will we be different from some districts where maybe they're not putting as much emphasis on SEL?
Sure. At the curriculum level for elementary, my first and fourth grade teachers, they are taking a pre-survey and post-survey before instruction is given, but then also at the end of instruction to see if their views have changed, if they have learned more information. I'm using that as a measure. Also, our students in grades 4 through 12 take the developmental asset profile survey every other year, and we're able to gather data on our students to see if we are meeting their needs and if we're on track.
Other questions?
I don't know that this is a question. I'm just curious how we support the families, because they're only with us 6 or 7 hours a day. So I'm curious if that's something that we already do or we aspire to do, or what's going home as well.
Okay, I think that's something that many schools are doing. I know our BCSC health and wellness newsletters are also shared with parents and families. I also include parent information in my first and fourth grade instruction that goes home, as well as they're called home workout activities. So they're additional activities that parents can do with their children at home to help promote these skills. And also through community building and what principals are also putting out there on social media and in their school newsletters. They're providing wellness tips for families and also just promoting that overall sense of community in each of their buildings. So our families are very comfortable coming to teachers and to principals for questions and for help.
Great, thank you.
What grade level's getting this?
Third grade.
Really? It's a lot of stuff in there for a third grader.
Yeah.
That's good. And what's a Kagan structure?
Kagan structures are cooperative learning strategies and techniques, ways that you can group students, ways to help students know when it's their turn to speak. They have shoulder partners or partners across tables from them. It just allows it teaches students how to communicate effectively with each other, but also promotes sense of community as well.
Okay.
And that can be academically, or that can just be a get-to-know-you activity,
Socially.
something fun as well.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Caldwell, one more question. What would you like to be doing that we haven't started yet?
Well, that's a great question. I didn't think about that one. I think the work that we're doing right now is going to lead to some really great things coming up. I'm really excited about the conscious discipline book study that we are creating. By creating these teacher teams, they are going to be somewhat support groups, if you will, for me to help make sure that I am helping each building get what they need and really getting teachers on board with promoting SEL and making sure that that is a priority in their classroom. I think that is something that I'm looking forward to and excited about to help push this even further.
Thank you.
So, may I? I'm sorry. So just to follow up from Mr. Stenner's question, I'm curious, so what do you imagine will be different in middle schools and high schools as we have done this at the elementary level? I get more, well, I'm anxious for everyone, but I get increasingly anxious about middle school and high school students.
I'm hopeful that this is setting the groundwork early, and it will carry on with them as they go through middle school and through high school. I think having that time for advisory and dedicating that time to help our adolescents in these areas is really helpful. So hopefully we are setting that groundwork to help this keep going through the older grades.
And for the teachers as well.
And for the teachers as well, absolutely.
Thank you, Mrs. Frazier.
Thank you.
Dr. Roberts, we have an update from you on the reopening plan.
You do. I think each time we start this, I say I'll be brief, so we'll see if that's true.
We don't believe
This
that.
time, we'll bring you up to speed with at least some numbers and so forth in regards to our reopening of school this school year, as well as give you a proposal to consider later on our action items. So just a very quick number, 11,307 is the K through 12 students that we have from that count date on September the 18th. We'll jump into more specific information about that during cabinet reports under Mr. Phillips. From a mask compliance standpoint, we continue to monitor that. You can see the bullet point at the bottom is the way that we are continuing to gather that data from a combination of a variety of methods. Elementary is at 97.1% now, secondary about 93%, and overall, if we take all of our buildings and combine them, it's at 95.5%. So just trying to continue to measure that and get the best compliance we can.
So that elementary number is up from the last time we saw it?
It is up, and secondary
is lower?
A tad lower, yes. Yeah, that is correct. Physical distancing, we've mentioned this as our biggest challenge through each week that we've had a conversation about mitigation strategies and COVID-19. I'll reference a hybrid model here and go into more detail about that in a little bit, what a hybrid model could do for us if needed due to community spread of COVID-19 is simply reduce the building student population by up to 50%. In regards to physical distancing and its challenges, we are having students return to in-person instruction. So as we went toward fall break, we did ask parents, students who are participating in our remote options to make a commitment to that option or return to in-person learning for this second 9 weeks of the semester. Up on our return, and we've had some variations in perhaps what was given to us in terms of feedback from parents and students, but it looks like we have 681 students back, or 42% of the students who were in one of our remote options returning, and 218 students at the secondary level, or about 25% returning. Of our middle and high schools, a higher percentage returned at the middle school than did at the high school. And when we take those students, now add them back in person to our buildings, we now have approximately 81% of our students back in our buildings. That is versus 72% when we were having these conversations, dialogues at the beginning of the school year. So we now are back up to over 80% of our students back in the buildings. From a COVID-19 measurement standpoint, I think is this the most recent one. I didn't do the check at 5 o'clock to make sure what was on the community's COVID-19 website, but this is what should have been. So up through yesterday, Sunday, October the 18th, you can see we've now been in red after we left fall break. So Saturday, October the 10th is where a 10.1 put us into red, and we've been in a red since that point in time. You can then see that the per capita rate is increasing. The percent positive test rate now increasing, so we've gotten to near 11%. And then the test turnaround time has actually dropped a tad, and the hospitalizations have actually remained relatively stable throughout this increase in per capita and positive test rates. I put a note at the top that I found interesting, and I'll show you another slide in a second, that says that Labor Day weekend began Friday, September 4th, which is 42 days before Friday, October the 16th, which is where we got to a 15.2. That number's important when I show the next slide. And 36 days before Saturday, October the 10th, when red was at a 10.1, and 10.1 putting us into the red. So looking at this indicator sheet from back in August, we see that we got into red on August the 9th, just as we were starting school. The first student day was August the 10th. We hit a 10.1 on August the 9th. And we got to about a 15 on August the 12th. July 4th weekend began on Friday, July 3rd, 40 days before Wednesday, August 12th, 42. And 37 days before Sunday, August the 9th, we got to a 10.1, 37 and 36. So a very similar movement or increase, I guess, in COVID-19 positive cases in the community after those long weekends, and where we may have not been quite as vigilant in our behaviors as we would be otherwise. So we have had fall break. We'll see what happens after fall break and several days after that, but that's just some information. After we were seeing these numbers, we wondered how that was comparing to July 4th, because it began to feel very similar to that time frame, and you can see that there are a lot of similarities to the graphs. The hospitalizations has been the piece that has remained at a steady number, basically. I do know that our census numbers at the hospital are a little higher than typical, but it's not due to COVID cases. The number of COVID cases or COVID-related situations is remaining, again, stable. This is just a graph we have each time. It shows the red, yellow, green we've had and where we might go based upon the information we have. And right now we consider ourselves, and have, even when we were in some of the green numbers here, we still considered ourselves in moderate spread and had our combination of a traditional environment or remote learning. And then if we get to a substantial spread, our reopening plan says we could go to an all e-learning environment. I'm proposing, after we get, well, I guess I'll jump to that in a second. We have had our local indicators in place since July 20th. The board meeting that we had, we talked about a reopening plan and proposed those local indicators. The state began capturing data and providing this chart to us on Wednesdays. They have been doing that over the last month. And so the state is looking at weekly scores and basing it upon positive cases per 100,000 residents, so per capita rate, but it's on a weekly basis. So instead of a number per day like 15, they're looking at numbers like 100. You know, how many did you have in a week? And then also a 7-day all-test positivity rate. Right now, the most current data we have for Bartholomew County, which goes back to last Sunday, is a 0.5, which would still keep us in the blue. However, counties around us, Jackson County to the south, you can see is in the orange, Brown County to the west in the yellow, and then I believe that is, what, Martin County? Johnson? Yeah, Johnson, no?
Which one?
Johnson's still in the blue, the one directly to the west of the Johnson, immediately north of us. No, it is Johnson to the yellow, I'm sorry.
Morgan.
Morgan County.
Yeah, it would be Morgan that is there. So anyway, we do have some counties around us beginning to have numbers that are not blue. And this graph a few weeks ago was, the state pretty much was all blue, so we've changed. So we were looking at that. The data is captured by the State Department of Health on Sundays, turned into this chart on Wednesdays, and released publicly. So we'll see what Wednesday's data look like. We believe that our 0.5 will tick up. Whether it gets to that yellow number or not, we will see, but we will believe that's quite possible. As our stakeholders continue to look at both these kinds of numbers and this kind of information, we have worked on a graphic like this, a visual that puts it into the colors that the state is sharing, because a lot of people are paying attention to that. That goes blue, yellow, orange, and red, keeps our measurements in mind, because we'll continue to have dialogue around these indicators on a regular basis. We maintain that Thursday morning meeting with our local medical professionals to understand where we are with numbers and to get advice and recommendations from them. But in looking at this, we have taken the, again, blue, yellow, orange, red, we're currently in blue, and looked at possible instructional models there, as well as what we would do with extracurricular and other instructional operational services. There's been a lot of dialogue within the community about continuing to work on more refined or precise or specific movement based upon community spread. This is a continued effort to understand where we are and then to be prepared to make decisions that are necessary based upon that community spread. So just reading through there, if we're in blue, all schools will provide a full-time in-person option while taking proper precautions, including physical distancing, focusing on hand hygiene, and wearing face coverings, and we will limit activities where physical distancing is not feasible. And then for extracurriculars, we talk about following state and local event gathering guidelines. We limit spectators in accordance with local guidelines. That's what we're doing. We get advice from the Bartholomew County Health Department. And then all other district operations, transportation, food service, et cetera, operates as scheduled. As we move through that, yellow basically keeps us in that same situation, but orange, which is where Jackson County is right now, and if you've paid any attention, I think all Jackson County schools are doing some kind of hybrid model now. In orange, elementary schools may continue full-time in-person option, so we're not just flipping the switch again, we're looking at the information, but we may do that while middle and high schools may consider a hybrid learning model. And there is an asterisk there that if we go down to the bottom, hybrid model will allow for enhancement of physical distancing in school buildings because it does cut the number of students that are there. And then if we go to the red, which is a high community spread, elementary, middle, and high schools consider implementing a hybrid learning model or a district-wide e-learning model, and then goes into the face coverings and so forth, continuing to remain in place. And we also then make adjustments for our extracurricular activities based upon, again, those situations. What we are looking at with putting this in place is just another way for our community to understand what is happening with community spread and to see what we might need to do from an operational standpoint for the schools, and looking at the hybrid model as a potential additional tool in our toolbox. Right now, if we try to make an operational decision based upon community spread, we'd be going from our current state to an all e-learning model, nothing in between. So this situation, if we would follow along, could add a hybrid model that looks something like this. So at the high school and middle school, last names A to K would go to school in person on Mondays and Tuesdays, so basically 50% of our population. The L to Z last names would be in e-learning. Wednesday would be an instructional day, would be e-learning for all, and that would look different at the high school versus the middle school versus the elementary school option. And then Thursday and Friday they would flip. So last names A to K would now be doing e-learning, and last names L to Z in person. Looks the same for our middle schools. For elementary schools, based upon what was shown from a visual standpoint with orange community spread, so going back to that, we'd be looking at maybe keeping all students in person for those 5 days while the middle school and the high school goes to a hybrid model. And then if we get into so we call it phase one, and then if we get into a phase two, we have red community spread, so we would be looking at perhaps all schools, elementary, middle, high, being in a hybrid model. The rationale for looking at elementary, middle, high schools a little bit differently is that our elementary schools has had a small number of student cases, and when we have student cases, if and when we do, and we have had, the number of close contacts is small. When we have a positive case at the secondary level, and particularly at the high school level, it is possible to get a relatively large number of close contacts, identified close contacts. I just want to take a moment to make sure we call out that particular piece. The local health department and the Indiana State Department of Health do contact tracing. We do the identification of close contacts. And so because we have the opportunity to try to identify people as quickly as possible around a positive test case and notify them and get them out of the building, if that needs to be the case, then we do go ahead with our part in identifying close contacts and asking them to quarantine. But then there is an official thing that happens from a contact tracing standpoint with medical officials from the county and state level. That number of close contacts does differ, just simply does, between our elementary and middle and high school levels. So that is what we have there. Before I jump into the rest of this, or just actually one more slide, is what I'll be asking you to do during the approval process, and if we would just look ahead on the agenda, besides the typical things we approve plus the budget for tonight, I have a revisions to our reopening plan. That revision would be adding the hybrid model as an option for us to consider as an intermediary step between going from where we are today to an all e-learning one, an attempt to at least maintain some in-person contact with our kids to the degree that we possibly can. Sarah did a great job of outlining all the social and emotional stuff that we do. It becomes really hard to do any of those things if the kids aren't in our buildings at all. So it does give us at least that option. I'll hit this last slide and take any questions you have. Just as an FYI, our positive test cases did jump up a little bit. It may be, I've heard you say this before, Mr. Caldwell, I think it's better if our kids are in school. We now have 56 positive test cases. 37 of those are students, 19 are staff members, and that number greatly increased from the Friday before fall break when we last reported our numbers. We were at 29, I believe, at that time. So we had a number of positive cases that occurred during the fall break and then received those results over a period of time into last week. Those have leveled out and are back to normal counts in terms of a given day, but we did have a quick addition of positive test cases. Very few of those positive test cases that came in over fall break or after led to large numbers of close contacts just because of when they occurred, whether it's a positive test case or due to the onset of symptoms, which we do go back 48 hours before those events.
So Dr. Roberts, to our best of our knowledge, those 56 cases, do they believe that they contracted COVID-19 through something while they were attending school? Do any of them think that they contracted it while they were in attendance at school?
It is really hard for us to identify patient zero, right? And so, but of the situations we have, we can cite one that we probably had a patient zero at school that would have resulted in another test case, at least with the information we
one of
are
the
able
56.
To. Yeah, right.
And so that drives my second observation is, I think when I look at your proposal here for what our response is to the increased number of incidents in the community, I think all of it, any response, is targeted at optimizing the safety of the community.
Yes.
And if I think just real simply that students and other staff members' days are broken up into 3 chunks. They're either sleeping for 8 hours, they're in school for 8 hours, or they're doing something else for 8 hours. I don't think you get COVID when you're sleeping, typically. I think that's a pretty doggone good track record for the amount of interactions we've had, but the cleaning, the mask discipline, the attempts at social distancing that we've had in classrooms. It seems to me people are contracting this when they're outside of the classroom or when they're not sleeping. And I wonder if we're making Bartholomew County less safe the more we move away from in-class instruction. So I know that's counter to what we've been thinking for the last 2 months, but I'm just trying to look at the data, and the data suggests the safest that our students are when they are in school. In fact, when I also look at the number of those students who've contracted that were full-time virtual or bridge, and the number out of that percentage and the number out of our 8,000, now 9,000 plus that are going to be in person, again, it's counterintuitive, but it says to me we're being our most lax when they're not in school, or I assume again when they're not sleeping. So it's that time when away. And it seems to me the hybrid model maximizes the opportunity for time away and then bringing us back together into the large groups and then time away and back together. It seems like to me you're actually accelerating the likelihood. I would appreciate a mathematician modeling that for us.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Dale Nallen's not doing anything
We
else
can
right
have
now
Dale,
other
he's
than running.
still
Yeah.
part of our system, so we can reach out to Dale to see if he can help us out with that. I appreciate that perspective,
Yeah,
Mr.
that's
Caldwell,
what I struggle with this-
right,
this
yeah,
proposal.
and will not argue it. We are looking for, I think it's well known that my desire, my wish is to have our kids in person as much as we possibly can. So if we're able to stay that course, that is where I'd prefer to be. The hybrid model that we propose is just that option as we see cases continue to increase, if that is indeed the case, as we consult with medical professionals, in lieu of going to an all-person e-learning, can we have something in between that is at least a possibility for us that doesn't currently exist? And again, my hope is we don't continue to progress in this way. If we go back to the one slide back in August, we continued. You know, we had that long run till we got to 20.1, 20.5, 20.3 over 4 days. We were over 20 cases, and then started a pretty steep decline, actually. And I'm hoping that we don't have a repeat of that. But if so, do we at least need to have something in our pocket to grab and put to use?
Board members, other questions for Dr. Roberts?
It's not a question. Can I ask it anyway?
It's not a question. You can't ask it. You can say it.
Yeah. So I worry about the communication in that I appreciate that the plan says may, which I would probably put in all caps and bold, because I worry that, I mean, we were pushed by some so hard that just give me a number, and when I see the number, we're going to flip and do something. So I'm anxious that we communicate well, that just because colors change, we're not necessarily changing our plan, what we're currently doing. So I still get nervous because it can't be an exact number and it can't be an exact color. There are just so many contextual things. Really, to your point, Mr. Caldwell, that I know that we consider both in the school corporation and the community. It can't be orange and red or black and white. It is very contextual. So that's just one point I'd make.
Sure.
The second is, I think I've read it in what we've received, is that for the middle schools and high schools, while learners may not be having in-person instruction, there will be space in those buildings for e-learning learners and or families who don't have all that they need to do e-learning at home, right?
Yeah, we'll be trying to maintain some certain core resources. Now, one of the pieces with the all e-learning model, we had a lot of moving parts happening in that. It becomes a little more complicated now with having the students still in the building and maintaining all of those pieces, but we still would run all buses, maintain classes like C4, make sure our special needs students and ELL students are getting the services they need, maintaining at least eye care before and after school, having the building service technology hubs, other pieces that would be similar to the all e-learning situation.
Based on that history, what indication is there, if any, that with Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and winter break coming up, that having in-person isn't the safest option, instead of providing a petri dish for this to rapidly spread. I mean, seriously, I mean, we can put all of our faith we can in the community, but if the data is showing anything, it's fruitless.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Labor Day weekend is a 3-day weekend.
Right. Right.
What are you going to do with a week off or 2 weeks off?
Yeah, we will see. Fall break will help us understand that, right? We will, by middle of November, we'll have seen what the results of that were based upon per capita rates, positivity test rates here in the county, and that will be certainly a precursor or a forecaster for Thanksgiving break, which is not quite as long as fall break, but has an extra day or two in there, and then Christmas break, which is the longest one that we would have, which is about two full weeks. Rich?
I'm curious too, what have we learned, or what might we learn about the relationship between what's going on? You know, a lot of the measures are the broader community, measures of the broader community. And some of those counties that are red right now, I don't know for sure, but one of the things they say on the evening news is that the county might be red because there's a meat processing plant there where there was
Right.
a lot of infection spread. Or a county might be red because of one or two skilled nursing facility cases. So in those cases, again, the county might go red. It doesn't make sense for the schools to go straight to a red plan. I'm not sure. Is there a direct, have we learned what the relationship is for us between what's going on in the broader community and what's going on in our school buildings?
Yeah, let me couch that in a couple of ways. One, in terms of at least what the State Department of Health is doing, they are trying to capture that, Mr. Stender, with citing situations where there is a congestion of cases and saying, okay, the county is maybe red or orange, but there's a qualifier in there. And so I exited out of the presentation piece of that. You can see like it's a little marker on some of these counties that's kind of an exclamation point, or at least a question mark that indicates that there's an additional challenge there. Locally, we've had those conversations. You know, one of the reasons that we meet regularly with our local medical professionals, that includes the Bartholomew County Health Department and CRH officials, is to understand what truly is happening within the community. We see the raw number. We see a per capita rate. We see positive test rates perhaps change and go up. What is that? What might be leading to that? Is there a defined situation or an understood situation? If not, then that's concerning. If it's just pretty widespread, if it is a very specific situation or circumstance, or there was a super spreader activity or event, then at least there's dialogue that can happen around it. I think that's why the May provision continues to be important, is having that dialogue to understand it. In terms of the relevance, we've had a little bit of a change over fall break and now, in that from August the 10th until fall break, as the ebb and flow of the community occurred in terms of per capita rate, we didn't see any ebbs and flows in the schools. We maintained a very consistent situation, about 3.5, 3.6 positive test cases per week. And then we hit fall break, and for whatever reason, whatever the situation, a lot of people went and got tested, et cetera, whatever. We did have the numbers during fall break and the beginning of last week. And since that time have again leveled out. But the beginning of fall break, the beginning of last week was the first time that we had positive test cases that were increasing at a time when the community per capita rate was increasing. So one snapshot of that, or one occurrence of that situation versus what I'd prefer occurred in the prior 9 weeks. And what we've learned from that, don't know quite yet as we try to understand that situation. I guess there's this little clarifier there.
So what you will be asking us to consider at item 2G in the agenda, 4G in the
4G.
agenda later.
Yep.
Will be basically the summary of those last few pages of using that as a guideline for you and your team to think about what your actions may be in responding to the different state levels.
Yep.
You are proposing that we can move to looking at the states.
Move to looking at the states in regards to understanding the differences between the options that we have. And so when we had the red, yellow, green, we have three colors there that basically put us in yellow, red in terms of our conversation. We will continue to maintain these indicators in conjunction with the local community COVID-19 task force. That information will continue to be posted every Monday and Thursday because of the richness of that data. There's a heck of a lot of stuff there, plus the mask compliance we track for you. We'll continue that. And we see this information every single day.
Yeah.
It gets posted publicly by 5 o'clock on Mondays and Thursdays. And then we are looking at this because a lot of people are tuning into the governor's press conferences, State Department of Health press conferences on Wednesdays, looking at this graph, and we felt we needed something that aligned what we were trying to do with at least what the state is reporting, and that's this graph here. So we would ask to put this page visual in our reopening plan with an explanation, and then this hybrid model learning pages, if it actually ends up being two, as the possible options for us if we get to the point where a hybrid model seems like the best thing to do next. So these 3 slides, 3 pages would become an additional part of our considerations in our reopening plan.
So may I ask for clarification? So the state does their math weekly.
Wednesdays.
So we're not including like a trend, like we're not doing this 1 week one color and the next week's a different color and poof, we do
So
something
we jump back,
different.
no.
But it
no,
would
no.
be a trend
Yeah.
thing going on. All right.
Yeah. So good point, Dr. Shedd. So 0.5 last week. We'll see what happens this week. And typically, even in observing counties around us, they are not jumping from 0.5 a blue to a 3 red number. So there tends to be at least a gradual movement in that. And we still are working on understanding their all test positivity rate because they're reporting a little bit of rate different. There's a piece in there that we're trying to reconcile. But as we did here, it's not we hit red on August the 9th and rode that for a little bit, trying to understand and see what needed to happen from a school corporation standpoint. So similarly, it doesn't automatically take us to a place because we get to a color, but at least leads us into a conversation, into consideration if that needs to be the case. And then once committed, we need to stay there for a little bit. So to your point again, if we would go, let's say 2.5 like Jackson County is right now, so we're orange, but next week rates decrease pretty quickly. I don't know that's possible based upon how that's calculated to go to a 0.5, but let's say you did. So all of a sudden you're jumping back down into yellow or blue. Now we wouldn't say, okay, we're back and jump back. We need to give it time and space. The timing that we are considering, and we continue these implementation conversations with our Teachers Association to understand all the little details that have to be worked out, but timing would be one of them, right? Is that how long would we stay into a hybrid model? Well, at least 14 days, 2 weeks seems appropriate because that's a quarantine time frame. So for no other reason, attaching it to a known number that is out there around COVID-19 of trying to protect yourself for 14 days. So at least a 2-week time frame would be what we would look to if we had to move to a model. And then based upon the numbers, if we would have to move again, do we get tighter? And that means now elementary schools are on a hybrid model too. You might have to do that for a little bit, and then, gosh, the things aren't changing, so we have to try something else. But my hope is that the experience we had in the first 9 weeks of the school year is what we will see as we continue forward in terms of how the school numbers were relevant to Mr. Stinner's question to the community numbers. But if they're not, if we do have indeed a large increase of cases and we have spreading occurring within the school, then we have to react to that. I would add that note in terms of the 50%, besides the 50% piece, and we would use that Wednesday, although we'd have some people in the buildings to see what needs to be done from a building standpoint, cleaning wise and otherwise, as we got ready then for the next round of kids on Thursdays and Fridays. To your point, Mr. Caldwell, it is 4G, and if we get to that point, you want to split that one out or whatever, obviously that could be
That's my intention.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts.
So you have an answer for coming back from a hybrid or e-learning environment, 2 weeks. You have a number tied to that. How long are you going to watch a trend going in an increasing direction before you have a serious conversation or make a decision about moving away from what we're doing?
Yeah, I would,
That's obviously over 2 weeks.
yeah, so
It was the last time.
in terms of how long, I would not give an exact day or number, but I can state that past experience, we were having that very direct conversation on August the 18th, 19th, and 20th so you can see where that fell, and we, in conversation, understood some circumstances within the community, also had a decreasing rate begin, and so continued to watch that. But there was very specific dialogue on the 18th, 19th, and 20th about going to e-learning, which was our next step, right? At that point in time, we didn't have a hybrid model in place. So that was after having seen a week of red numbers and them being increasing. So that's at least an example to cite of where we are. But that Thursday conversation, and it's more often if necessary, I'm throwing that out as a once per week thing. Probably the week of the 10th and the week of the 17th, we had probably 5 different conversations with our local medical professionals, and including a dialogue with the community COVID-19 task force as a group to understand what might need to happen. So that's the dialogue we're having.
Okay, so the answer is the same as the discussions back then. There is no...
That's correct, James. I don't have a specific number of days of per capita rate increasing to say this is when we're going to flip it and go to that hybrid model. But I would add that the additional piece of information that we have here that we didn't have then is a county number that the state's also providing as they're measuring our statistics and have recommendations too. These recommendations, I don't think I cited or stated that, are drafted from state language as well, that the state has from the State Department of Health, the governor's office has said, if you get into these levels, then you might consider doing these things. So we are adding those to, again, our toolbox as options to potentially utilize if community spread takes us that way. We had a COVID-19 meeting last Thursday, which was on the heels of, let's see, make sure I have my dates correct here. The 12th was last Monday, so the 14th of Wednesday. So we had our conversation on Thursday morning. We were at a 14.2 from a per capita rate, had dialogue around that, and with hospitalizations and other things seeming to still be favorable. So we'll continue to look at that number. We went from 14.2 to the 15.5 in those next 3 to 4 days of reading, and that's where we are.
Yeah, and James, I'm not trying to muddy the waters, but I'll tell you that I want to hear from our Bartholomew County Health Department and the other medical community officials that Dr. Roberts has been talking with. I want to hear why we're not actually putting the community at more risk by taking away in-person schooling options. To me, right now, the data suggests that's the safest place for our children. I know many families will swear that they're keeping their kids safer by keeping them home and doing virtual learning, but the data suggests that as a population, and because I'm sure some are, but as a population, that's just not true. When we break down that 56 and look at how many of those students, I know this for a fact prior to fall break, how many of those students were out of the population of virtual learners only, and how many were out of those in person? They were all coming back. I know in all of the cases at that time, Dr. Roberts has said one now that we know of that may have contracted it through a contact. We believe, right? Maybe, and again, we don't know for sure, but I don't like that solution. But I struggle with, is that really? And again, because I think it's the structure. I think it is wear your mask, wash your hands. We have good cleaning surfaces, and I know we've not been able to achieve the 6-foot social distancing that we want, but we've been struggling and working to maintain social distance, and I think that doesn't happen when you leave the school.
Same mitigation strategy is not being practiced in other environments.
Right,
Most likely.
in other settings, right. So we will leave time for more discussion at item 4G when it comes time to vote on what Dr. Roberts has proposed. I'd like to move forward, board, if that's okay.
Yep. Thank you.
We come to public comment section. And
Let me get to the thing.
Dr. Iorio, are you still here? I think you're right behind the post on me. Okay, it's your opportunity. I really apologize that we've had you sit through an hour and a half. If you'll come up, okay, there you are. If you'll come up and introduce yourself, and I'll ask you, I'm not going to make you stick to 3 minutes because doggone it, you put through 90 with us. So.
Hi, good evening. I'm Tammy Iorio. I'm a pediatrician at Northside Pediatrics in Columbus. Also a parent of 3 BCSC students at the secondary level right now, and I have a daughter who's at college who went through all 12 years at BCSC. So I actually found it really fascinating, so I'm glad I was able to listen to a lot of it.
Thanks for bearing with us.
I decided to come this evening to put a plug in to encourage some more open communication regarding COVID. And I want to share something that happened in the last 2 weeks personally in my family that brought this issue really to the forefront. There's some communication that would just be nice. I love that Dr. Roberts just went through kind of week by week what the number of cases were. I think that's something that I haven't seen in the newspaper. I've seen snippets of this week there were this many cases, there's been this many since school started. That's good, but I think seeing a week by week is something that would be great. That would be nice. I think that splitting up the hybrid and remote learners who are sometimes in the building, because many of them are not full-time remote. All 3 of my boys are listed as bridge students. They all 3 are scheduled to be in their buildings for up to 2 hours a day. So that would be nice. But what's not just nice, what is necessary to stop the spread and to keep families safe is an enhanced communication around identifying those contacts. And so I want to share a story as briefly as I can about something that's happened in the last 2 weeks. So over fall break, there were numerous fall sports having their sectionals, beginning of a state tournament. Soccer teams among them. 2 of my boys play high school soccer. And at one of our soccer games, on Tuesday of fall break, there were about 25 boys on the bench. A sectional game means the roster is larger than normal, so there are more boys there. There are many great things that BCSC has done to make sports still something that can happen. The buses are de-densified, as they like to say. You know, we had 2 buses to transport 1 team. Students are allowed to ride with parents if the parents would prefer their student athletes not to be on the bus at all. I think that's great. There are mask rules as they arrive and when they leave, and when they're not playing or drinking, getting a water break, they're supposed to be wearing masks. These are all great. But the social distancing, just like it's a problem in many of our classrooms, it's a problem on the sidelines at many sporting events. If any of you have either been to a football game, been by a football game, or watched one on streaming, there's no social distancing on the sidelines. And it can be the same issue, I think, at other sports, for sure, with soccer. At our sectional game, we had over 25 athletes, and there were 2 benches that were right next to each other, and there's no other place for them to sit. So social distancing didn't happen. Luckily, most of the players were wearing their masks, so this makes it a pretty low-risk situation. On the Thursday of fall break, so less than 48 hours after our match, I received a call from the parent of one of our players, because besides being a parent and being a pediatrician, I volunteer as much as I can with my students' activities, and I'm the parent manager for the soccer team, meaning I coordinate all the emails between the team and the coaches and the families. And this parent called me and said, my player, who was at the game Tuesday night, is COVID positive. And it's a story that he shared with me that isn't relevant to the story, isn't relevant to this, but they found out that day that this student was positive. And he said, can you please send a message to the team to make them aware? And I said, well, I think we probably ought to check in with the school first. We don't want to, surprise anyone with a message of something like this. And I know that there are people that are supposed to run through the proper communication channels. So I volunteered to help, and I made 4 phone calls to people at the school and the corporation. And I explained the situation and was told that there was a process, there was a procedure, that the corporation would assume responsibility and take care of that. I was asked not to say anything to anyone else. So I called that dad back and said, you should be prepared for a phone call. I'm not to say anything else, and neither are you. And he said, okay. So I didn't say anything else. I'm well-versed in not talking about medical conditions when it's through my work. This was not through my work. I was contacted as a parent volunteer and as an acquaintance of this father, but I still followed instructions, decided to let the process work, and didn't say anything. I didn't even say anything to my own boys. They heard a rumor within a day that there had been a player that was positive and pushed and tried to figure it out, and I did not tell them who it was. I said, if we are affected, we will receive a phone call, and we did not receive a phone call. On the Monday after fall break, so 6 days after the soccer match and 4 days after I made my phone calls, my son came to me and said, Mom, I know who it was. He said, he told me, he's my friend, you know that. And I said, okay. And he said, why don't I have to quarantine? I was sitting right beside him. And I said, well, tell me more, what do you mean? Because as a parent, you don't always watch the other side of the field. He said, I sat right beside him the entire half of the first half until I went in. As a 15-year-old boy, I didn't necessarily believe him immediately. So I actually went and pulled up photos from the game that we had and looked, and it was true. Both boys had masks on, so again, a relatively low-risk exposure, and yet still an exposure. More than 15 minutes, less than 6 feet away, and I found out about it 4 days after I could find out about it, and 4 days after he's attended a girls' soccer game. He's delivered groceries to his grandparents, luckily just delivered them outside. He had attended school, actually for the first time this whole year. He went to school last Monday. And so all of these things were things that didn't have to happen. And as Dr. Roberts pointed out, the school is not expected to be contact tracers. I understand that. And yet the school had taken on some responsibility to identify contacts. And this school was given the information that there were definitely contacts at this soccer match. It was less than 48 hours. These were all student athletes that were sitting in close proximity during an entire match. And somehow the process failed. And so luckily in this case, his quarantine is over tomorrow. I knew what to do. We started quarantining him in a different part of the house immediately. I contacted the school. He hasn't been anywhere else. We've had masks on at home. He's not been sick. His test was negative. I have no way of knowing if any other players who were possibly exposed had a different outcome, and it's not my business. But I can say for a fact that this was one example of a failure in the process to identify contacts, even when the information was provided. And sometimes contact tracing can be difficult, or even identifying close contacts, if those involved are not forthcoming with information, but that was also not an issue here. This family asked to send a message. They wanted to share with the team this information to try to protect people. So it looks like in the end it may have turned out okay, and that's wonderful, but I hope that going forward that the corporation can come up with some possibly improved ways to notify people if there are exposures at BCSC events other than telling people not to say anything. So I appreciate all the rules that we have in place that have allowed kids to go to school, whether it's full-time or part-time, that have allowed kids to be in band and be in choir and play sports. But if we want to continue that, really the only way to do that is to make sure we're identifying contacts and informing people so we can control the spread. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Yorgo. Can I ask you this is not to find and punish the guilty, but just to help us make sure we
Sure.
cover any gaps in our communication. Would you be comfortable just communicating afterwards with Dr. Roberts via email or somehow the 4 phone calls you made so we can understand? Is that okay?
Yes, certainly. I would talk to Dr. Oyer at any time, but I have seen the information she's.
Oh, you're already aware. Okay, so you don't need that communication?
I've talked with Kelly Thompson, who I think had also received the information from Dr. Arroyo in regards to that
Okay.
particular process.
All right, so we're good. All right.
At least understanding the process that happened there, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the only person that signed to speak this evening. Let's move on to our next agenda item, the Neola policy revisions. Wow, that was a pretty massive chunk of the packet this time.
I'm trying to figure out how come I left that off because of how important that is, we left it off the presentation. But anyway, yeah, so you had quite the packet of policy revisions. So a reminder that from a Neola standpoint, about every 6 months, you're going to get a packet of information that is updates based upon recent legal developments, whether that be legislative changes at either the state or federal level, or case law that has changed the way that we need to look at things. So that is what you had in front of you, kind of unlike Title IX, which we separated that one out, although again, some very specific changes we were trying to address. This is just a typical packet for you. There were some COVID-19 related policies, but if we jump into those, let's see, there we go. Golly. Yeah, my issue in terms of when I was revising this, I think I put the slides in twice, so here we go. In terms of that one, and I'm going to jump into that piece, and we'll return to the board accommodations, cabinet reports, and so forth. So with the policies that you had, policy 0151, organizational meeting, that was a technical piece, so just being made to correct some outdated citations. 0152, technical again, correcting outdated citations and providing uniformity, making sure we were referring to the school board and school corporation. The word board and corporation was used before. So again, some of these things sometimes are pretty simple. 0154, motions, revisions to accurately reflect the required board actions at the organizational meeting. So when we have the organizational meeting in January, we're just making sure to reflect what actually happens there and updating citations that reflects current law. Committees, another technical change to correct outdated citations and provide uniformity, again referring to the school board. Executive session, information revised, so the bylaw revised due to amendments in Indiana code. It does address the allowable purposes for an executive session. It also talks about language that allows you to call an executive session. Treasurer, 0171.4, just reflects the options provided in regards to motions. It is a consistency piece. There were some grammatical changes, and again, it does allow the treasurer to appoint a deputy as pursuant to state law. 3120.11 is a public hearing before the commencement of collective bargaining. We just saw that happen. We're adding that to policies. That Senate Enrolled Act 390 does say that we need to go through this process, so we're making sure policy reflects that.
Oh, excuse me, would you read that one again? So it says before starting negotiations. That, I don't understand.
We had
Just to allow it's a public hearing to allow the community to speak up on, do they have any charge to us as a board or to the administration as we enter to that?
Yeah, there were two public sessions added by SCA 390. One was a public hearing before we started bargaining. We did that on the 15th, something like that, before that September 15th date, and then the public meeting tonight was the second one from this act.
Okay.
We did comply with this
Sure
new
we
policy
did.
this year.
I've been in plenty of meetings. I just
Yeah, second year that we've actually followed this without it being a part of our actual policy. 5111 is just determination of legal settlement and eligibility for enrollment of students without legal settlement, and the corporation goes through pieces in there that talks about how we rescind approval or establish terms or conditions for enrollment. 5460 graduation requirements is just there were new requirements for this year based upon HEA 1629 that added a section and talks about making sure that each senior receives notifications concerning FAFSA and the process and benefits of completing FAFSA. 16105 is the authorization to accept and distribute electronic records and to use electronic signatures, so it allows us to do that now, and then even gives specific authorization when dealing with Medicaid assistance for IEP services, so it just gives us more flexibility to use the electronics available to us when going through these things. 6250 is required ADM counts for the purpose of state funding. It gets into State Board of Accounts, student engagement policy, and addresses when those ADM counts might be and how that applies to our state funding.
Could I ask a question about that one?
Yep.
Because I was curious, where it talks within that policy, it talks about virtual education and internal controls to ensure the definition of enrolled. So I appreciate how much of an issue that is. I was just curious about what those conversations are for our internal control of counting enrolled.
Yep. And Chad, unless you want to try to take a go at that, I'm going to pull up the policy to look back at that language in terms of the internal controls piece.
It doesn't tell you how, it just says you should have an
Right.
internal
That's exactly
control.
right.
Right.
And I was just curious what we have been thinking about, because I know that's been tough. This
Yeah,
first
and you're referring, although it's in that policy, it's really internal controls over everything in that department, right? I mean, it's called out again specifically in this policy, but even the audits that we will have on an annual basis usually refer to that particular piece as making it necessary that we have established an additional set of internal controls.
But Dr. Shedd, you're asking the question of how do we ensure that someone we count as a virtual student is in fact a virtual student?
And,
So you're getting specific to
well,
that.
and using the policy that they're enrolled.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just know it's been an issue, because it's unclear to me if the state is calling enrolled as attending or
Oh, I see.
enrolled. Do you
Yeah.
see what I'm saying?
Right, yeah, I do.
Yes.
I do.
I think
Okay.
Chad's ready to answer there, Dr. Roberts.
He is, and we also have a couple of other, specific to that point. Internal controls is, in my mind, because we see that in audit all the time, but if specific to the piece about attendance for virtual students, that may or may not be something you want to refer to, Chad.
Well, I believe that there are really two issues going here. This policy and the problem that the legislature was trying to address is a result of schools that were deliberately, or corporations or for-profit charter programs that were deliberately cheating the system and taking dollars. Because of that, we then had to put in extra precautions to make sure that we don't even accidentally let one student be counted who's not actively enrolled and engaged in our system.
Brand new one.
Now, because of COVID and the fact that we have thousands of students enrolled virtually now, or enrolled in a virtual program, an internal control as a formal process does not exist. But for this year, as we worked on making sure that no one slipped through the cracks, the ADM process included a check between our office, who completes the formal collection of the student lists and submits those to the state, a process between our office and the building principals and administrators to make sure that every student that they submitted to us had been engaged in learning activities prior to the STN. And we did remove some kids that they said, oh, these two just came back in the days just following ADM count, and they hadn't engaged in processes before that. We took them out.
Okay.
So we got caught up in some schools and some for-profit corporations that were cheating the system.
Sure, okay.
Thanks for that, Chad. Appreciate that. The next one is 7540.02, web accessibility, content, apps, and services. Very important that whatever we're doing electronically, it is accessible to all. And this policy attempts to clarify that and talks about how we will ensure that that's the case. 8330, student records, addresses the release of educational records in health safety emergencies and talks about how we might need or can do that and not violate FERPA if we truly have an emergency happening within the school corporation. 8420.01, and it does start to tie into COVID-19 related things, by the way. 8420.01, pandemics and epidemics. This is where we do get into COVID-19 language, and so it's something that you should consider. And then control of casual contact communicable diseases is revised to update the list of common communicable diseases and include this 2019, although it's 2020, it did first surface last year. And that's what we have. So that list of items is in front of you for a first reading, and we'll continue to take whatever suggestions you might have and/or as we review it, make tweaks as might be necessary to bring back to you, I guess November 9th is our next meeting for a recommendation for approval.
Since we're on the subject of policy revisions, has there been any consideration given to the 3112?
Conversation has been had. Mr. Caldwell, do you want to respond to that? I know you had.
Yeah, I had shared with Mr. Monroe, and he got back with me saying, hey, we ought to talk, and he and I haven't talked on that one yet. My only concern was making sure that some of the revisions that you had recommended, Mr. Persinger, didn't step over a line that we still had protection against litigation or any other concerns that were there for liability of the board with the changes, and that gap's on me. I didn't get back with Chris on that yet. So
what I could indicate, James, I did have some conversations with Mr. Monroe after having seen yours and just looking at things and making sure. So we've been working on that. And that's since we met last week for an officers meeting. Next Friday is our strategic planning session. I'd say we make that an agenda item, is that with all 7 board members in an open conversation. You have I think 7 can attend, or at least if not in person, virtually, and have dialogue around that policy and anything else that seems to be in front of you at this point. That's scheduled again next Friday, 9 to 12, I think, right. October the 30th.
On the 30th, right.
Okay.
Okay. Good question. Good catch.
Okay. Any other questions related to these policies? A few new policies, other revisions, but most of them relatively minor in nature, technical catches, just some changes in citations, making sure everything's up to date.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts.
You're welcome.
Let's move on to the next item, board commendations. Board members, anything to share tonight? What about school board member reports? Again, I know many of our subcommittees aren't meeting as regularly.
Just an announcement, we do have a districting and facilities committee meeting this Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. The Zoom meeting or Zoom link will be sent out to all who are participating. We're reviewing ADM counts like you'll see tonight, as well as the renovations we've been completing. And we do have a date set up for you all to tour the 3 facilities we've recently updated: the Columbus East Auditorium, T&M building, and soccer complex. And actually, quick note about that, a note from Dr. Bozeman this afternoon. Our Columbus North girls soccer team won in thrilling fashion twice on Saturday, including a last-second goal. Tell me the last time you saw a last-second goal in a soccer game to tie the score and then go into overtime. They play in the semi-state Saturday. They will practice on our new turf field tomorrow, right, Dr. Bozeman? Because they'll be playing on a turf field in the semi-state, and we've been cleared to actually allow the kids to opportunity to practice on that field. So excited about that, first use of it. And we're doing that November 9th prior to the school board meeting. And it seems like there was one other thing we were going to cover at that night, or that meeting on Thursday. But anyway, District and Facilities Committee meeting on Thursday morning.
Okay. And then cabinet reports. Mr. Phillips, you want to start with the ADM update?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Just 2 very brief updates. The ADM, final ADM is completed, up 31.7 students. Basically, we were saved by a very small senior class going out. So the kindergarten group coming in, of course, was small as we expected, but that class of 2020, again, those are the children born in the 10 or so months, 12 months following 9/11, 2001. So that small class moving out really helped us keep that ADM where it needed to be. Again, like I mentioned before, it's still below where we were even in fall of 2017. So some work to do to rebound there, and we think we'll get there next year.
May I ask 2 questions? I'm sorry. I'm curious about Schmidt's growth. I mean, it's really kind of the only elementary that really grew. Is that an anomaly, or is there something that we need to be sensitive to, that there's a trend going on, because that's getting really big?
We have, Dr. Shaw, we have a larger spreadsheet that goes back several years that we track and look at those kinds of things. And actually, prior to that, Schmidt had been down 21 students the year before,
Okay.
and 30 students the year before. So we do track those trends over time. And they just seem to, at least in the last 6 years or so, correct themselves. Like Mount Healthy had grown almost to a point of unsustainability over 3 or 4 years, and then this year they were finally back down. So
Okay.
nothing at this point that we see as concerning.
Okay, okay. And maybe you've answered the question about the high schools, that we saw the really low senior class. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so they look like their growth is pretty substantial this year. But it was really just a normal size 9th grade class coming in to replace a very small 12th grade class.
Okay, thank you.
I think off the top of mind, we always think of North as about 2,100 students and East about 1,600 students. And those numbers had kind of, if you round them off, they were lower than that last year, but they're back to those kind of numbers, 2099 and 1562. Chad, if you have that graph in front of you, that's the last 5-year one or something like that, of the elementary schools, there are only a couple that actually grew in numbers over there. And I know at one point in time we talked about another elementary school and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of our elementary numbers, over a 5-year period of time, the increases were which buildings?
They were at Clifty at 58 students is their 5-year trend, Lincoln 25, and then Taylorsville 6.
Yeah, so only 3 buildings that grew as they
Okay.
increased, decreased over that period of time.
Thank you, Chad. And then do you want to follow up with your Q3 financial report?
Sure, thank you. And I'll stay seated for this one because there's very little to report on this. This is the education fund, and there's only a few cells highlighted. Generally, in April there, you see that the state support decreased. That was when the ADM kicks in from the February count, and so that reflects the decrease in our enrollment from fall to February. And then July is when the state's per pupil support kicked in, the new support level for fiscal year 21. And so that was a huge help and actually led to us being slightly ahead of where we would expect to be from an overall revenue perspective. And expenditures are probably tracking a few percent behind where we would expect. Again, most of that's still the lingering effects of COVID and the expenditures we didn't experience in the spring and during the summer. And I do expect the cash balance in the education fund to be up at the beginning of the year over the 2.1 that we started the year with. And again, due to revenues higher than expected and expenses lower than expected.
Chad, what's the interest cost to us on that tax warrant? That
This year-
$10 million, what is that?
I'm sorry?
What's the interest expense tied to that? I mean, that's essentially a loan we take out, and knowing that we're going to get the money, but at a later date. How much do we pay for that? Because I'm looking at our balance, and it says you've got a lot more tummy comfort there, but we didn't really need it this year. I mean, we would have always had a positive balance without that $10 million.
Correct. It was under 2% from an interest standpoint. All of our tax anticipation warrants together, the operations fund, the education fund, and the 2 debt funds, so there were 4 total. I want to say it was about $22.3 million in total in loans. And
So
the total,
$450,000 in that range?
closer to 500,000 is the final amount, I believe. But I do that report in February, but I'll get you those numbers, send them to you. This has been probably the worst year that I've seen to borrow money like we did in January and then try to earn interest on that money as it sits in the bank. Just last year was the opposite. It was as good a year as we could have expected.
Yeah.
And then onto the operations fund, again, not a lot of items out of what we would expect. The one thing that is different is the August revenue in the property tax line there. They did distribute taxes that were collected late there after the governor's order allowed folks to pay their property taxes late. And so we still are a little behind where I would expect to be from a percentage standpoint on our revenues for the operations fund, but nothing that I'm concerned about. And expenditures also behind where I would expect them to be. A lot of utility savings from the spring, from COVID, fuel, those kinds of things. So generally, I would expect us to be at the same level at the end of this year in the operations fund as we were at the beginning, around that $5.6 million mark.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips. I'll move on then, Mr. Caldwell, to the request for approval. The list not too long today or tonight. We do have the minutes of the regular scheduled school board meeting from September 28th. We have a list of supplemental contracts in your packet, as well as field trips / professional leaves and school fundraisers. We also have 2 sets of claims, as well as the payrolls for September 25th and October 9th. Additionally, we are asking you to, after 2 meetings talking about the 2021 budget, to adopt it. That includes a Form 4 resolution, bus replacement plan, capital projects plan, a resolution to authorize reductions, and the lit resolution. And then the additional one that you can decide, vote, I guess, to move that one maybe off there, but included in the consent agenda is revisions to that 2020-2021 reopening plan, which includes the hybrid model as a potential option.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Board members, I'm going to ask first for a motion to approve items 4A through F as presented on our agenda. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Dayhoff-Dwyer. And Mr. Bryant, can I take yours as a second? Are there any questions for Dr. Roberts? I'm sure Chad would be willing to go back to any details on the budget again if you'd like. I may personally want to see one of you outside if you ask him a question on it again, though. You get us well prepared. All right. If there are no questions, all in favor of items 4A through F, please indicate by raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 4G, do I have a motion to accept item 4G, the revisions to the 2021 reopening plan as presented by Dr. Roberts this evening?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Shedd. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Any questions? Yeah.
I did have one. In our agendas, we use the word revisions, but if I teased out what's actually happening here, we're just adding.
I guess it'd be addition. Yeah.
Adding to
Options, right.
That's a good point, Mr. Senator. Yeah, we're not changing any current language in the.
We're not removing.
No, this is adding options for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the motion that's on the table? All right. Hearing none. All in favor of item 4G, please indicate by raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion carries 5-1.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 5, request for approval of human resources recommendation. Ms. Heine.
Thank you. I'm requesting approval of the human resource recommendations as presented this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Heine. Do I have a motion to approve the request from Ms. Heine?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Dayhoff-Dwyer. And a second? Thank you, Mr. Kersinger. Any discussion? All in favor, again, ask you by indicating raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Heine.
Mr. Colwell, if I may,
Yes.
before getting into board input review, with the public meeting of the for the tentative agreement, we didn't ask for public comment, which I think is allowed during that time. And so I made a note on it when we got through public comment for the other thing, so it just may be an opportunity to at least allow that to be the case in case
Thank you.
somebody wants to
My
speak to it. No, I
apologies.
just
Yeah,
made a
my
note when it was, after it was over and didn't hit it on public comments, so wanted to return to that.
My
that piece.
apologies, thank you.
Yeah.
So let me, was that gavelled out of meeting?
It was.
Okay,
Yep.
so I'm going to briefly gavel out. We're back into that presentation. Is there any comment from anyone on the BCSC CEA tentative agreement like to be made? All right, hearing none, I'll gavel back in. All right.
Thank you. I wanted to be able to
Thanks.
check that off and
Good-
make
good
sure that
catch,
was
Dr. Roberts.
taken care of. Thank you.
My oversight. Board input and review. Ms. Day-Alpdwyer, anything from you? Thanks again for getting us started with your story.
Thanks.
Good to hear. Mr. Stenner? Mr. Persinger?
No.
Dr. Shedd?
I just appreciate that we're constantly working on things. Things aren't cut and dry. I appreciate what we learned about social emotional learning. It's so important and particularly important right now, so I appreciate what we're doing. It just seems that we're always growing and getting better, and I do appreciate that about us.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryant?
I think Ms. Fraser had left, haven't she?
Yes.
I had a question and then a request if it would the answer depend on the answer. Do we include our SROs and our DARE officers in the SEL program, educational wise, I guess?
So they are included as it's more like in places they're in the building to manage their presentation and work with them, but we haven't connected those resources together. That's something to consider for sure.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Dr. Roberts?
Nothing else to add, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you.
I think as we reflect on the proposal that the CEA members are considering right now, and hopefully we'll be able to consider for approval as a board on Friday, I want to be reminded to thank the community for their support of the referendum. It was, this will be their tax dollars at work, and I think the community recognized it's a good place for their tax dollars to be working, so I appreciate that. We do have a board meeting scheduled for this Friday at 4 o'clock. We'll make accommodations for that to be both either in person here at the Terrace Room or via Zoom. We also have a strategic planning session scheduled for next Friday at 9 a.m. on the 30th. That'll be in the boardroom upstairs.
We might need to, yes, we have that listed, but we might change that to the
Okay.
terrace room just because of the number of people we have and making sure we can spread out
Convenience
appropriately. Yeah.
For distancing, that's
Yeah.
fine. And then our next regular school board meeting is Monday night, November 9th, here in this room again at 6:30 that evening.
Yes.
If there's no other business to come before this board, this meeting's adjourned.